The smile my brother gave me when I walked into that conference room wasn't the kind you see at family dinners. It was practiced. Wide and flat, like something he'd rehearsed in the mirror that morning. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because the eyes are too busy calculating. I noticed it immediately. I noticed everything about that room. The way the fluorescent lights hummed just slightly too loud, the way his lawyer had arranged the papers into neat stacks like he was already filing something, the way my brother sat back in his chair with his arms crossed, relaxed, like a man who had already won. He hadn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My grandmother raised me from the time I was 4 years old. I don't say that the way some people say it, casually, as a footnote. I say it because it's the whole story. It's the foundation everything else was built on. My mother had what people in our family politely called a difficult season. Addiction has a way of swallowing a person whole, and by the time I was 3, there wasn't much of her left to take care of a child. My father had been out of the picture even longer than that. So one afternoon, my grandmother drove 3 hours from her home in rural western Tennessee, packed a bag of my clothes and my stuffed rabbit named Earl, and brought me home with her. She never made me feel like a burden. That's the thing I want people to understand. Some children who are taken in by relatives grow up with that weight, the unspoken debt, the constant awareness that they are a problem someone solved. I never felt that. Not once. My grandmother, I called her Gram, had a farmhouse on 12 acres outside of a small town called Millbrook. She grew tomatoes and kept 2 chickens named after soap opera characters. She made biscuits on Sunday mornings and let me sit on the counter to watch. She drove me to school every day in her old Buick and picked me up every afternoon, and she was always exactly where she said she'd be. She gave me ordinary things. I know that sounds small, but when you come from the kind of start I did, ordinary is extraordinary. My brother David was 11 years older than me. He was already a teenager when I came to live with Graham, already half out the door, headed toward college and then a career in finance, and then a life in Phoenix with his wife and his golf membership and his opinions about what other people should do with money they'd earned, and he hadn't. He came home for holidays. Sometimes. When it suited him. He remembered my birthday about half the time. And when he did remember, the gift was usually something impersonal. A gift card. A generic candle set. Once a coffee maker I'd never asked for. He and Graham talked on the phone occasionally. Brief calls that I could tell she tried to keep warm even when he wasn't giving her much to work with. He was not unkind exactly. He was just absent. And I was a child, so I didn't fully understand then what it meant that he chose to be. Gram understood. I think she grieved it quietly. She poured that love into me instead, and I tried to deserve it. I did well in school. I got a scholarship to the University of Tennessee. I studied nursing, moved back to a town about 40 minutes from Millbrook, and visited Gram every weekend I could manage. When she started slowing down in her late 70s, I visited more. When her knees got bad, I helped her rearrange the kitchen so she didn't have to climb anymore. When she needed rides to her cardiologist, I took the days off work and drove her myself. David visited twice in 6 years. I'm not saying that to be cruel, I'm saying it because it matters later. Graham turned 81 in March and we had a party at her house. Just close friends from town, a few women from her church, my co-worker who had become almost like a niece to her. She wore the blue dress she always said made her feel like herself. We had a lemon cake because that was her favorite, and she laughed more that afternoon than I'd heard her laugh in months. 2 weeks later, she had a stroke in her kitchen. She was found by her neighbor, who had come over to return a casserole dish and noticed the back door standing open. The ambulance got there fast. The hospital was 40 minutes away and I drove it in 32. She survived the stroke, but she was different after. Quieter. Some words took longer to find. Her right hand trembled when she tried to write. The doctors were honest with me. This kind of event rarely happens in isolation. The brain, once it's been through that, is more vulnerable. We needed to think about next steps. She came to live with me. I converted my spare bedroom. I installed grab bars in the bathroom. I rearranged my entire life, my schedule, my sleep, and I did it without once feeling like it was a sacrifice because it wasn't. It was just love with its sleeves rolled up. She lived with me for 11 months. David called once during that time to check in. His wife sent a fruit basket at Christmas. When Graham passed, it was early on a Tuesday morning in February. I was holding her hand. The room was quiet and her face was relaxed in a way it had been getting more and more these last few weeks, like she was letting go of things she'd held too long. I told her I was okay. I told her she could go. I don't know if she heard me. I believe she did. I drove home from the hospital in the grey winter light and sat at my kitchen table for a long time without doing anything at all. The call from David came 4 days later. He didn't lead with condolences. He got to those eventually, a few sentences in, but they felt like a formality he was trying to clear out of the way. What he really wanted to talk about was the estate. I've been going over some things, he said, and I think it makes sense for us to sit down with an attorney together, just to make sure everything's handled fairly. I remember that word, fairly. Graham had a will, I said. She updated it 3 years ago. I helped her find the attorney. Right, he said. I know. But I've been talking to someone and there are some questions about the circumstances around when it was drafted. I was quiet for a moment. What kind of questions? Just, look, I don't want to get into it over the phone. Can we meet? We met at a diner halfway between his hotel and my house. He'd flown in from Phoenix the day before. He brought his wife, which I hadn't expected, and she sat beside him with her coffee and her careful expression, and barely said a word the whole time. David explained that he had consulted an attorney. His attorney, not one he and I had chosen together, but one he had retained privately, had advised him that there might be grounds to contest the will on the basis of undue influence. I had to ask him to explain what that meant. It means, his attorney had apparently told him, that if one beneficiary was in a position of caretaking authority over the deceased and used that position to influence how the estate was distributed, the will could potentially be challenged. I stared at my brother across that table for a long moment. You're saying I manipulated Graham, I said. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are questions. David, I was a nurse. Her family. I moved her into my house. I was with her when she died. Right, he said again. That word again. Flat, non-committal. And you are also the primary beneficiary of an estate that includes the farmhouse and 12 acres of land that's worth considerably more than either of us realized. There it was. I'd known about the property values, vaguely. The area around Millbrook had been changing. A regional brewery had moved in. A few Nashville people had started buying weekend land nearby. Graham's 12 acres, which had been worth maybe $200,000 when I was in high school, had been appraised the previous year at just under $800,000. The farmhouse itself had been assessed separately. David had done his research. She left you the brokerage account, I said. She left your kids the savings bonds. She included you. Not proportionally, he said. I drove home that afternoon with my hands tight on the wheel and my jaw locked, and a feeling in my chest like something had been scraped hollow. I had spent 11 months sleeping lightly so I could hear if Graham needed me in the night. I had given her medications and changed her bedding and read aloud to her from the Louis L'Amour novels she loved. I had held her hand while she was dying. And my brother, who had sent a fruit basket, was now consulting attorneys about proportionality. He filed a challenge 6 weeks after the funeral. I found out through a certified letter, which is a particularly cold way to find out that your brother is suing you. I want to pretend the weeks that followed were manageable. They weren't. I cried more than I expected to. I went through a phase of pure fury that made it hard to sleep. I called my best friend, who's also a nurse, and talked to her for so long one night that we both lost track of time, and she had to be at the hospital at 6 in the morning. But I also called an attorney, a good one, a woman named, I'll just call her my attorney, who had been doing estate law in Tennessee for over 20 years and had a particular calm about her that I found steadying. She listened to everything I told her. She reviewed the will, the documentation around its drafting, the timeline of Graham's medical situation. She talked to the attorney who had prepared the will, an older gentleman in Millbrook who had known my grandmother for 30 years and was, to put it mildly, unimpressed by the challenge. The will is solid, my attorney told me. It was drafted when your grandmother was fully competent. There are notes, witnesses, documentation. The undue influence argument is a stretch, and frankly, the facts work against it. Your grandmother had an independent attorney. She had her own legal counsel. There's nothing here that suggests you directed any of this. So what happens now? I asked. Now we respond, we produce documentation, and we wait for him to decide whether he actually wants to take this to court or whether this was a pressure tactic. I asked her which sheepcoat it was. She paused. I think your brother hired someone who told him there was a chance. Whether there's a real chance is a different question. We responded to the challenge. I gathered everything: the timeline of my grandmother's care, her medical record showing her cognitive status at the time the will was drafted, written statements from her church friends about her clarity and her intentions, a letter from her neighbor who had seen us together regularly in those last years. I also found something I hadn't known existed. While I was going through Graham's documents, her file cabinet, organized in a way that made me cry a little because it was so thoroughly her, I found a sealed envelope. On the outside, in her handwriting, it said, "For whatever needs to come after. She'll know when." Inside was a handwritten letter, 4 pages, front and back, in the careful slanted script she'd used all her life. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a codicil or an amendment. It was just her, writing about her life, her choices, why she had done what she'd done. She wrote about me. She wrote about the afternoon she came to get me when I was 4. She wrote that she had watched me grow into someone who showed up always, and that she had tried to build something that would hold me the same way she had tried to hold me. She wrote about David, too. She wasn't cruel about it. She was honest. She said she loved him and that she had tried for a long time to understand why he found closeness so difficult. She said she hoped he found his way to something warmer. She said the choices she made with her estate were not a punishment but a reflection, a record of who had been present. She had written the letter 14 months before she passed. She had sealed it and filed it, and in her practical, clear-headed way, trusted that I would find it when the time came. My attorney read it. She set it down on her desk very carefully and looked at me. "This doesn't change the legal standing of the will," she said, "but it does something else. It tells the story in your grandmother's own voice." The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April. We met at a conference room in a law office in Nashville. Neutral ground, my attorney had suggested, and David's attorney had agreed. That was when I saw the smile. David was already seated when I came in. His attorney was beside him, papers in neat stacks. His wife hadn't come this time, and he looked at me with that flat, practiced smile and said, "Hey, sis," in a tone that was meant to sound casual and landed somewhere closer to condescending. I sat down. My attorney sat beside me. I put my hands on the table and kept them still. The mediation was not a trial. There was no judge, no courtroom, no dramatic moment where someone stood up and declared anything. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder. 2 hours of careful legal language and documentation, and my brother's attorney making arguments that I had to sit still and listen to without reacting, which took every bit of composure I had. My attorney presented the will. She presented the documentation around its drafting. She presented the timeline of my grandmother's care, the medical records, the witness statements. She presented the letter from my grandmother's independent attorney in Millbrook. And then she placed my grandmother's handwritten letter on the table. David's attorney picked it up. He read it. He read it again. He set it down. David reached for it. His attorney put a hand on his arm just briefly, just a touch, but David picked it up anyway and read it himself. The room was quiet in a different way after that. I watched my brother's face while he read. I'm not sure what I expected. I think I expected the same practiced blankness, the same flat affect he'd been maintaining all morning. Instead, something shifted. It was small. A tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. He finished reading and set the letter down and looked at the table for a long moment. His attorney leaned close and said something quietly. David nodded almost imperceptibly. They asked for a short break. When we reconvened, his attorney spoke carefully and in measured tones about his client's willingness to consider the matter resolved, provided certain conditions. I won't detail them here because they were minor and ultimately didn't change anything material, were agreed upon. My attorney looked at me. I lifted the letter still on the table, in my grandmother's handwriting. Yes, I said, we can agree to that. The farmhouse is mine now. The 12 acres. The tomato beds, dormant through the winter but coming back now. I can see the green shoots when I drive out there on weekends, which I do every week because I couldn't bear to sell it and I don't have to. I've been staying there on Friday nights. I bring Earl the stuffed rabbit. I still have him. He's worn down to almost nothing, but I've kept him for 30 years. And I sit on the back porch in the evening and listen to the way it's quiet out there, in a way that nothing in town is quiet. I think about Gram a lot. I think about the particular way she had of making a person feel seen, not celebrated, not performed for, just seen. She had a way of sitting with you in a problem without rushing to fix it. She'd listen and nod and eventually say something that went straight to the center of the thing. Something so plainly true that you wondered why it hadn't been obvious before. I think about what she wrote in that letter, that her choices were not a punishment but a reflection, a record of who had been present. I've done that over many times since April, and the way you turn a stone in your hand. I don't think it was meant as a verdict on my brother. I think Gram was too clear-eyed for verdicts. She knew what she was doing, and she knew why, and she committed it to paper in her own hand, and she trusted that it would find its way to the people who needed to read it. David and I haven't spoken much since the mediation. There was a brief exchange of our logistics, a few texts. Nothing warm, but nothing hostile either. I don't know what happens from here. I'm not sure it's my question to answer. What I know is this. I'm 31 years old and I grew up on 12 acres in western Tennessee with a woman who made biscuits on Sundays and named her chickens after soap opera characters and drove 3 hours to pick up a 4-year-old she didn't have to save. She gave me ordinary things. She left me everything. And on Friday evenings, when the light goes low and gold across the backfield and the mockingbirds are going off in the tree line, I sit on her porch and I feel, more than anything else, the weight of having been loved well. That's the inheritance that actually matters. The rest is just paperwork. I've thought about what Graham wrote in that letter more times than I can count. Not the legal weight of it. My attorney made clear it didn't change the standing of the will. What I keep coming back to is the word she used, reflection. She said her choices were a reflection, not a punishment, a record of who had been present. That distinction matters to me, because I think there's something true in it that goes beyond my situation, beyond my brother and the farmhouse and the 12 acres. We make choices every day about where we put ourselves, whether we show up or whether we don't, whether we call or send a fruit basket, whether we sit with someone in their hard season or wait to see how things shake out on the other side. And those choices accumulate. They compound over years the way interest compounds, quietly, invisibly, until one day the total is undeniable. Graham wasn't making a decision in the final months of her life. She was recording a decision that had been made and remade, day after day, for 3 decades. I don't think I did the right things because I was angling for something. I need to say that plainly. I moved Graham into my house because he was my grandmother, and she needed me and I loved her. There was no calculation. If anything, I was too tired most of those 11 months to think past the next morning. But looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have articulated then. Doing the right thing is its own kind of intelligence. Not book intelligence. Not the kind that gets you a better job or impresses people at dinner. The kind that knows, in the quiet of a Tuesday afternoon, what the moment is asking of you and answers it honestly. That's what Graham had. She was one of the wisest people I've ever known, and she never once led with credentials. She led with her presence. She led with her attention. She showed up consistently for the people and the work and the life in front of her, and she did it for 81 years without making it a performance. What my brother didn't understand, maybe still doesn't, is that the letter wasn't a verdict. It was just the truth, written down by someone who had spent a lifetime being honest about what she saw. He could have contested it. His attorney could have argued around it. But when he held those 4 pages in his hands and read her actual words, in her actual voice, something shifted. I watched it happen. I don't know what he felt. I'm not sure I need to. What I know is that you can't shortcut your way into something that was built through years of presence. You can't show up at the end and recalibrate. Life keeps better records than most of us realize, and the people who love us see more than we assume. I'm 31. I have a lot of years ahead of me, and I want to spend them the way Graham spent hers. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but honestly. Showing up. Doing the hard thing when the hard thing is what's needed. Holding on through the uncertain middle without guaranteeing myself a particular outcome. She taught me that. She taught me early, and she reinforced it every single day. The rest, as she would have said, takes care of itself.